Welcome back. In the previous video, we looked at how generative AI can be used across a wide variety of tasks. In this video, we'll start looking into how LLMs can be code companions, how generative AI can be used as a tool to make us more effective developers and software engineers. So we'll do that by looking at a few concrete examples. As most of you probably know, large language models are pretty good at coding. In this example, I asked ChatGPT to create a simple Python script for scraping the website Hacker News and extracting the titles of the top news articles posted on the site. And we see that this is no problem for ChatGPT. And as you probably know, these kind of simple tasks, they take up a lot of developer time. So having tools that can make these simple tasks more efficient is quite valuable. And these systems being chatbots, you can of course continue the conversation and ask for additional features or adjustments. And by the way, when you continue a conversation with this kind of chatbots, the model is then fed our new message plus all the history of our previous messages and the responses. So that is now the input to the model, so it knows about the context and what has been going on before. This also means that since these models have a limited context length, meaning the number of tokens they can remember, at some stage earlier parts of the conversation will disappear from the bot's memory. But this is typically not a big problem in practice, as the context length is quite long, like 8,000 tokens for the basic GPT-4 model and 32,000 tokens for the one with a longer context. And other models have context length up to 100,000 tokens. Plus, there are many tricks to deal with the fact that you have a limited context length. Okay, so in the end here, I ask for a feature where the title extracted from Hacker News is fed into a text generation model using the OpenAI API, and you could imagine then asking for a website that sort of is a mock-up or a copy of Hacker News, having the real titles but fake content dreamt up by GPT. So let's take a look at another more comprehensive example of LLMs used as code companions or pair programmers. And in this example, we aim to create a program that can transcribe what is being said in a video that a user uploads. It's going to be based on the Whisper automatic speech recognition system by OpenAI. And we'll try now to have the LLMs do all the heavy lifting and minimize the effort that we need to put in. On the left side, you see ChatGPT, of course, and on the right side, we have Visual Studio Code, and I've enabled the GitHub Copilot chat and the GitLab extension. So let's start a new project called Whisper Demo, and then we have an example video that we will try to transcribe, so we can have a look at it.
I'm pretty sure that you are here because you're excited about what's going on in artificial intelligence, or you just have a feeling that this is something that's useful to know for your further career. The underlying technology behind a lot of spectacular breaks.
Okay, so this is our example video. It's from a lecture and we want to transcribe it. So we start by creating a PY file for our methods transcribe, and then a README file, and here I just put in some basic ideas of how we will solve this. So we had some idea from the get-go. Whisper system, it came out after the training of these GPT models, so they don't know about how to use Whisper, but of course we can just tell them, and we can tell them by just adding this to that file. The Copilot chat, it has access to all The Copilot chat has access to all the files that you have open in your Visual Studio Code. Okay, and we start by putting in some imports, and then look, I'm just hitting tab basically hitting tab to everything that the Copilot suggests. So this is a piece of code that supposedly will probably solve the task. We can ask the Copilot chat system for improvements to this by marking it, and I asked please improve the marked code, and it has some ideas about error handling and the file paths being hard coded and so on, and the organization of the code, and it suggests this update. So okay, let's use that. So then we go to ChatGPT and we define its behavior as we talked about with a system message, and now its behavior is to be a professional programmer in Python. So I put in a system message that tends to work well for writing Python code, and these kind of things help a lot for the quality of the outputs of ChatGPT. So it is now given the behavior of being a programmer. So we can save this, and then I will ask ChatGPT for improvements to the code that was basically generated by me and the Copilot chat system in Visual Studio Code. So I just paste it in and ask for improvements. And of course it will respond. It's doing it quite carefully because I asked it to in my system message. So I have some background context and assumptions, because remember that what is written here will also then be part of the further dialogue. So it's good practice to have it think a little bit and explain its thinking. And here is an example or a refactored code, an improvement supposedly, according to ChatGPT, of the code. Okay, so maybe we'll like this, and we can then paste it back in and try it out. Okay, so we run this by just running Python on the transcribe.py file, and let's see what happens. Well, we get an error. Attribute error, non-type object has no attribute decode. And okay, so then we look into the file a little bit and realize that the name of the input file was wrong. It was called tmp.mp4, so I changed it. Of course, we could have asked the LLM to fix the error, but some things we can do, right? Okay, and now it works, and here's the transcription. So the audio was extracted from the MP4 from the video, and then fed to Whisper, and then written to a file transcribe.txt. So that's how we solve that. But we can continue, of course. Maybe we'd like the code maybe we want it to be possible to interact with these functions both via a command line interface and a graphical user interface. So how can we do that? We ask ChatGPT. Okay, it has some ideas, right? We can parse the arguments given on the command line, perhaps in the command line interface, and then we can create a simple graphical user interface in tkinter, and then maybe split up the logic here into separate files, so make the whole thing more modular. And there we go. Here are suggestions of code and the names for the files, how we can organize ourselves. Okay, and now you see it's writing the command line interface first. It had the basic logic is in a separate file, and then the graphical user interface in a separate file. And we can try it out, right? We can just follow the suggestions by ChatGPT. It wanted us to call this core functionality file that we already had, audio processing, and then command line interface, a new file, and a new file GUI interface. I'm just pasting it in, right? And then we can try to run it in the way that ChatGPT recommends or suggests. So I pointed to my temporary video example, and then off we go. So you will see that it works. No, it does not work. There's an error, and in this case, let's just paste the error into GitHub Copilot chat. Maybe you can guess what the fix is, but anyway, we can get help also, right? This could have been a complicated error. And it, of course, suggests or reminds us that, oh, you're using the OS module, so we should import it. Okay, so we import it, and then try again. And this time it works. So here is the transcription. same as before. So that was the command line interface. We'd also like to use the graphical user interface. So it's going to be exciting to see how that looks. If you didn't look into the code there, you don't know, but okay, this is the user interface that the ChatGPT suggested. So very, very basic, but it can, you have a button, you can click it, and then upload the file, and then start the transcription. And of course, we need to import OS also in this GUI interface file, and now it works. So it's running the same audio processing, right, as the command line interface. It should work. And we get the transcript here, same as before. But this wasn't a very nice looking graphical user interface. So next step is probably make it better. And here we can use basically the trick that we discussed in the previous video. We can ask ChatGPT to score our user interface according to some criteria. So we have lots of ideas probably about how user-friendly, how this application is, how useful it is as it is, the design and the functionality. But also ChatGPT will have an idea. So it's now scoring it, and it's giving some pros and cons to how it is implemented. And now if I follow this discussion up with another question, it has access to its critique, right? As we discussed earlier, it has all the previous messages. So now I can just ask it to revise and then try to maximize the scores on all the criteria. Okay, so here's an updated code for the graphical user interface that incorporates some of the ideas formulated in ChatGPT's critique of the user interface. Also, it claims this should offer a substantial improvement. Let's try it out. So we just copy the code, overwrite what we had, and try it again, and voila! Now we can do a little bit more. We can name the files. We can choose the model to use from Whisper, and name the output files. And otherwise, it's doing the same job, right? So it's slightly more user friendly. It has this progress bar and all these possibilities of naming the outputs and choosing the model, which is maybe the most important thing. There are different variants of the Whisper model, and we may want to choose another variant. Okay, so maybe we are basically happy with our first version here. So we will want to make a GitHub repo and write a README file. So let's ask ChatGPT to suggest the structure of the repo and propose a README file in Markdown. So this is all we need to make the GitHub repo for this first version of the application. So we can just copy this. But okay, so let's say we do that. We will probably want additional features. We may have some ideas of additional features that would be nice. We can also ask ChatGPT for some ideas, some new features for the program that could be convenient or engaging for the users. It's suggesting batch processing, maybe multiple files, choosing a language, editing the transcript, and progress monitoring in the command line interface, cloud integration, different export formats, not just the TXT file, and scheduling and automation, and a bunch of ideas, right? Some we may like. Perhaps you like the audio previews, that you can preview the audio when you transcribe it. So let's ask it to implement that. And then we get a way of doing it using Pygame to play the MP3 file. And here is an updated version of our program that incorporates this. So we can then copy that into our into Visual Studio Code to make our program. And maybe we could have other ideas that ChatGPT didn't come up with. Maybe we want some audio visualizations, so you can actually see the waveform of the audio in the graphical user interface. So ask it to add that to the app, and okay, it can do that. it has a way of doing it. It's choosing one way of doing it. Of course, I can argue and say maybe use different Python packages to maybe make it more look nicer, but whatever. Let's try what it suggested. And once we've done both of those things, meaning restructuring the code into this repo and making the README files, there's the README file suggested by ChatGPT, and then updating with this audio visualization, it looks like this. So again, we can transcribe audio, but in this case, we can also play it.
I'm pretty sure that you are here because you're excited about what's going on in artificial intelligence, or you just have a feeling that this is something that's useful to know for your further career. The underlying technology behind a lot of spectacular breakthroughs over the past few years. Okay.
And maybe we'll want it to create a better user interface than this. Maybe we want some React app using Next.js or whatever. And so I ask for that and some ideas of how to achieve that. And we can continue iterating on this and making it better or moving it in the direction that we want. So this is all AI, right? The transcription is AI. So the Whisper model is based on similar principles as the models behind the large language models, the transformer kind of models. So it's all AI, solved by AI. So this kind of thing is really useful as a developer. As you can imagine, the efficiency boost is tremendous depending on what you're trying to do. And in this case, I let the LLM do most of the heavy lifting, not all. We could, of course, do more of the programming ourselves and then use this code companions just to help us out a little bit. Or we can give the whole entire task to AI. And that is also happening these days. So we can have a look at, for example, this example.
Don't force me out of bed in your society. Don't push me down the road you're bending down. Don't try to fix my head, it's just your anxiety. Don't hush me now, cause I just wanna shout. Don't make me dance to a tune that you're humming. No, my body don't move like that. Don't make me pretend I don't see your shortcomings. You'll be running when I raise the black flag. Get out your bomb and fly away. We'll be dancing with our hands in the air when our new dawn is rising. To the break of dawn.
So clearly, the no-code solutions are improving rapidly based on this kind of technology, which is can be a little bit scary for software engineers. So the no-code solutions can take over a bunch of jobs, but the trick is then to become a more effective developers by incorporating these tools into your work. Probably that will be the way forward. So these were some examples of using LLMs as code companions. And now it's definitely your turn to explore. So you should try this out. You should try to create applications by leaning on these large language models as code companions. In the next video, we'll look at how we can build software on top of generative AI. In other words, generative AI powered software. And as we will see, building software on top of generative AI is like a new paradigm for software development. We are used to building tools that are reliable and relatively understandable, right? But how do you best build something if you don't know if you don't know whether what you're dependent upon will work at any given time? How do you debug something when the core technology can't really be debugged? moreover, how do you trust the underlying technology when even their creators don't really understand it in full detail, and they won't share what data the system was trained on, and what assumptions they made or corners they cut in constructing these tools? And how do you know what can go wrong, and how do you build accordingly? So trust, testing, safety, the whole thing is full of new questions. And when things of this magnitude and this many open questions comes along, it's a great opportunity for software engineers. So when we start exploring this, we will mostly use the OpenAI API. So you are encouraged to explore how to use that on your own before we get to it together. So see you in the next video.